Hey, it is Andy with the Fence Post Indie Music and Vinyl Blog in part 2 of my series on Everything Was Beautiful and Nothing Hurt. I am going to talk about Spiritualized and the double album that should have been. Let's get started. There's a Kurt Vonnegut quote out there that reads, "Everything was beautiful and nothing hurt." It's a famous line from his 1969 novel Slaughterhouse-Five. Let's take a step back to 2018. And Nothing Hurt felt like a complete album. And when it came to Everything Was Beautiful, it just felt like something was missing. Knowing retrospectively that it was intended to be a double album and that both Everything Was Beautiful and Nothing Hurt was meant to be a cohesive double LP, sheds a new light on, well, both. Let's take a look inside Everything Was Beautiful. Should have actually come in at number 6 on my best albums of the year countdown. The album starts with Always Together With You. Now, I love this song. I've loved it since, well, before this came out. Why? Because it was actually released in 2014 in demo form on a compilation called The Space Project. Its presence here is initially a conundrum. Was it intended in J Spaceman's vision to be part of the original double album? I mean, it certainly fits, and it provides a near perfect opening track, harkening back to Spiritualized at the end of the last century. There are similarities here to what J Spaceman created with Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space. I had the pleasure of seeing Spiritualized live at the Morse Theater in Seattle back in early to mid-2019 with a previous partner of mine. And even in the show, J Spaceman and band incorporated elements of Morse code as found on the record itself for And Nothing Hurt. Both visibly and audibly, it creates this thematic element, a container, a confinement, a consistency that boldens and unifies the album. I mean, there you've got that Morse code. I loved that. In my head, knowing the conceptual idea behind Everything Was Beautiful and Nothing Hurt as a double album, with that name, that full quote as the name, I wish there was a little bit clearer depiction between the two visibly. I wish there was a hype sticker that said Everything Was Beautiful, a companion piece to And Nothing Hurt. I felt the metaphorical isolation of And Nothing Hurt was almost over the top in the best of ways, don't get me wrong. J Spaceman in his astronaut outfit, the antiquated presence of Morse code, a language that not many speak anymore, or key anymore, I should say. The introspection, it was all visibly and audibly stunning. With Everything Was Beautiful, it took quite a bit more digging to come up with those parallels, some of which I threw out in the last video. Okay, hold on, pause. I feel like I'm being a little overly critical here, and that's not entirely warranted because, as I mentioned, I really love this album. It should have been number 6 on my best albums of 22 list. The detachable pillbox, the simplicity of the printed inner lyric sleeve, the absolute void of photographs minus the reflection, which tells you to look inward. It screams isolation. It screams introspection. And once again, the Morse code. And now, another clue. And Nothing Hurt ends with Morse code. The Morse code is over the fucking top. It drives it home constantly. Everything Was Beautiful begins with Morse code. That connection, it's there. But that's the only presence of it on this album. Even though it's in the first moments of the first song, it's extremely easy to miss unless you're kind of actually looking for it. Unless you know that element from And Nothing Hurt. On Everything Was Beautiful, J Spaceman played a whopping 16 instruments on the album. And on top of that, he pulled in 30 additional musicians to lend their own expertise and expand Everything Was Beautiful into this truly sonic masterpiece in only a way Spiritualized can do. This was something that seemed kind of missing from And Nothing Hurt, which found J Spaceman kind of scaling things back, to be honest. But don't get me wrong, at that live show, sitting and watching Spiritualized perform And Nothing Hurt, even though I was way up in the nosebleeds, I was blown away by the sheer volume that Spiritualized produced. And going on a Spiritualized binge this past week at a coffee shop, I was reminded of this moment when I was listening to The Best Thing You Never Had. It drowned out everything. In a room full of people, it left me isolated, a hidden observer, just an indistinct part of the couch. Okay, let's get back to Everything Was Beautiful. Like many other Spiritualized albums, J Spaceman blends the softly melodic with the sonically monumental. Let It Bleed, Song for Iggy, and Crazy both start out incredibly quiet. The former grows into this massive, explosive track, whereas the latter retains the softish, borderline countryish twang pretty much throughout the song. And that's a sound that Spiritualized seemed to emphasize on And Nothing Hurt. The inclusion of a choir on Crazy adds to the song's uniqueness, which is something that Spiritualized does from time to time, and it becomes a solid album midpoint. The Mainline Song, it's like my favorite song on this album. It layers in a solid chorus, and that's probably the most memorable thing on Everything Was Beautiful, where the A song, Laid in Your Arms, returns to this more explosive sonic blend of space rock and shoegaze, and again, that sound that makes Spiritualized so great. Circling back, I kind of love that the two albums are separate. I mean, yeah, I know they were intended to be a double album originally, and I feel that, yes, there was a slight missed opportunity to tell the story and conjoin them a little bit more as a cohesive unit, as companion pieces, but maybe that's what J Spaceman intended to do, to keep them separate, to keep them, well, isolated. And maybe that was on purpose. That subtlety was there to just let the listener know, the diehard listener, the diehard Spiritualized fan, the Kurt Vonnegut fan, it was there to let them know that that connection exists. And otherwise, they're meant to be ingested, pillbox, individually. And that brings us to the end. I'm Coming Home Again concludes the rather brief album with just 7 songs. And it's kind of symbolic, at least in my mind. In the Album of the Week feature on Stereogum for Everything Was Beautiful, they noted that they had an interview with J Spaceman around the time of And Nothing Hurt, and he had been calling that album his last. He needed a break, he needed a refresh. And where And Nothing Hurt found him in a space of exhaustion, something that if you really listen closely and you already know that, maybe it's projection, maybe not, you kind of get that sense that maybe that's the case. But that's not the case here. Maybe ending with I'm Coming Home is an ode to his inability to give up on Spiritualized as a creative outlet. Maybe in a subtle way, that was his way of saying that I'm not done yet. I just needed a break. Now, maybe he said something since then that says, hey, you know what? I just wanted to complete this double album that should have been, but I don't know. I haven't seen anything about that. If you've heard anything, let me know in the comments. In my next video, I'm going to dive more into And Nothing Hurt. So don't forget to like and subscribe. I will see you then.